I've been writing fanfic so long that I had to lie about my age to do it. When I was a kid, back in the 90s, I discovered two things almost simultaneously: play-by-email role-playing groups and the Dragon Riders of Pern. These clubs were groups of people with a shared interest who would create a character within a fictional world, write stories about that character, and then send those stories out to a mailing list. Sometimes these were solo stories just about your character, but more often than not, they were collaborative narratives that were written by multiple writers. I'd also do play-by-post, where I'd post my character's actions in a forum thread, and then other writers would reply with their character's actions. I was like 10 or 11, and most clubs, at lowest, took 13-year-olds. And as a young writer, those clubs represented the first place that I would get feedback on what I was writing almost as soon as I wrote it. And for a significant part of my life, into my early 30s, I was nearly always a member of at least one of these clubs. In a time when I was deeply unsatisfied with my life, these clubs represented a place where I could fantasize about being a different person living a different life. It was an escape for me, as much as it was writing practice, a social group. From these clubs, I would make friendships, develop my own voice as a writer, learn what story elements worked and didn't, and much, much more. Obviously, role-playing was a way for me to interact socially with others with pre-planned rules and expectations. This was easier for me to handle than the seemingly unwritten and inscrutable social rules that applied to real life. Also, with a little more control, more time to think over my responses, I found ways to express the elements of my personality that my real jobs and relationships were leaving sorely neglected. When I tell people that for a long time I would write 10,000 words of such fanfiction a day, I get a lot of questions. The first is usually, why didn't I write something unique or original? Why did I stick to somebody else's IP, which I could never publish or monetize? Well, a lot of reasons, but the three biggest are: I do best with collaborative writing because I second-guess myself or I lose interest in what I'm working in. I need some sort of instant gratification feedback from a readership. Second, I knew from literary analysis that your writing and world building say a lot about you. When you make your own worlds, people can get a vibe for what things you fear the most, which things you find worth defending, etc. I was hiding a lot of aspects of myself to be desirable to both hiring managers and prospective boyfriends. A lot of men are very insecure about committing to a bi woman, for example. On a bigger level, I think people who believe that writing is only valuable if it can be turned into a commodity are fundamentally misunderstanding what writing is for so many people. Communal improvised writing within a fandom is basically just like a text-based LARP or tabletop RPG. And a big part of me finds it humorous that the people who play tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons will often be the first to criticize online text-based role-playing. Fandom roleplay is seldom taken seriously, and I think a big element of it is that the people who are most prominent in these communities tend to be women and marginalized folks. I think there's a mistaken impression that it's all about adult or lascivious content, but I think that's a smaller subsegment of the collaborative writing community. Another question I'm asked a lot is, do I regret so much time writing in other people's worlds? No, but I used to. I used to think about how many words I'd written over the years, which is several novels worth, and think about where I'd be if I'd written novels instead. But realistically, I wouldn't have written novels, first off, because a huge element of what made me successful at fanfic was the fact that there were other collaborators to help keep me interested and invested. When I got writer's block, I could just pass the torch to someone else who could continue for a bit. I also do feel I got a lot out of it. I got a lot of long-lasting friendships, and I admit that a big reason that I bought into these clubs so hard is because they were an integral way I was escaping the trauma that my real life was causing me. I was also healing my trauma in the only way available to me, which was writing fictional stories that in some way had been informed or motivated by traumatic things that I had experienced in my life. And I suspect that a lot of people in fanfiction write because it's escapism and therapy for them as well. A lot of people also ask me how I managed to do that even when I had a full-time job. I've nearly always had jobs in IT that either required a lot of time on the phone with users or watching software install itself, or other scenarios where I just needed to monitor something, and I became very adept at using that time to bang out a couple hundred words or read someone else's posts. I would often write for hours every night. My peak as a writer was when I lived alone, so I would literally come home, eat dinner, and write fanfic while I watched a baseball game or a football game in the background. I often speak of the benefits, which makes people then ask, well, what were the benefits? First, I honestly believe I learned more about how to write enjoyable, compelling prose from fanfic writing than I did from college writing courses. Having invested people who want to help you improve your writing because they want to read better stories from you, it's a power contributor to developing a solid written voice of your own. You're also reading a lot of other people's work and incorporating the things you like from it into your own style. It's a way of really quickly leveling up your writing skills, so long as you have the humility to realize you're not perfect. Since you're often writing shorter pieces and not a full novel, you get a lot of feelings of success, and it's like you've achieved something, which is a nice dopamine hit. It's also a good way to gain confidence in your writing and meet people with common interests. For me, it was a big way of exploring things that I couldn't in my real life. For example, in Dragon Riders of Pern, the canon of the world explicitly makes gay characters a necessary part of society. So you have this fascinating phenomenon where it attracts middle-aged, straight women who are actually more than a little fruity. In Star Trek, I played aliens a lot. The traits that made me good at masking made me good at putting myself in the head of alien characters. As an undiagnosed autistic, I have always felt like an alien. Through these aliens, I could express parts of my personality that I had to keep hidden at work and in relationships. I wrote Bajorans because I could relate to the persecution that I felt as a gay person in Catholic school. The Kardashians and Catholics share a lot of similarities, oddly enough. I wrote Joined Trill to be allowed to express myself in both masc and femme ways. I wrote Orion so I could express my frustration over being over-sexualized so young against my will. I now understand how much these characters were therapy and an outlet for me back when I didn't even realize how traumatized I was. Having these characters really helped a very broken part of myself heal. Many of my characters felt alive inside my head, felt like fully developed people with their own interests and passions who made choices that defied my wishes as the writer. It is astonishing how real fictional characters can be for the people who write them. It's also a low-risk way to work on your writing weak points and experiment with things outside your comfort zone. You don't have to worry about world building or making a full cast of characters or having compelling hooks or outlining a full plot of your own. It really reduces writing in a lot of ways to its most thrilling components, just writing, the achievement of finishing something, and then ideally the joy of feedback. But obviously, there were setbacks. As any scenario involving other people can be, there are always personality conflicts. You will always find people who just don't like how you write or what characters you focus on. Some people do take criticism poorly or get angry when a collaborative story just doesn't go the direction they wanted. Some people are just there to write smut, and those people may be pushy with people who don't want to write smut with them. I previously mentioned how I use this escape, and how a lot of middle-aged women were using it to get queer experiences without straying from their hetero marriages. There are definitely people who are in bad relationships and who use those relationships their characters are in for escapism. Those people often get very upset when the relationships their characters are in don't go the way their idealized relationships in their head go. Some people blur the lines between character and writer. I'm not going too much into it here, but I plan to one day do a video on how people in unsatisfying real-life relationships often develop a vivid fantasy world of characters written by themselves and their writing buddies. Though one kind of weird setback is that I really don't have much interest in new Star Trek. I get that we finally have explicitly gay characters, but none were anywhere near the level of relationships that I played out with my own characters. I've gotten to write Star Trek in exactly the way I would have liked to see it, and that makes it feel like a step back to watch Picard. And in using Star Trek the way I did, as a trauma outlet, it's impossible for me to step back into it without also acknowledging the trauma. But if I got so much value out of this, why then did I ever stop? And I think that answer is multifold. First, often the structure of the clubs made it easier on me as an autist. The leadership of this clubs was often something I struggled with. I have a lot of ideas and suggestions, and I want to naturally better spaces that I'm in, and sometimes admins find that helpful, but sometimes they find that threatening. I had a hard time with admins misunderstanding why I was there and thinking I wanted to take over their club, which was never the case. I never wanted to be the leader because it's a lot of energy I don't have. I also found myself less inclined to write fanfiction as I became more healed and started living my life more authentically. A lot of time the characters I wrote were individuals who were able to succeed and thrive in areas my real self only dreamed of doing. I was using these fictional stories about characters as an escape, and now that my real life is more healthy and fulfilling, I don't feel the same drive. Also, it's just physically quite difficult for me to type that many words, and while I do use voice dictation heavily, I find many of them struggle at handling proper grammar, especially at a reasonable speed. I get very frustrated at the technical limitations nearly every time I try to write a script or anything nowadays, especially because Google's dictation used to be quite good. I used to use it almost exclusively back when I was doing 10,000 words a day, but then they broke it. And as lovely as it could be to receive feedback, there were some spaces where only a chosen clique got feedback, or sometimes everyone was interested in their own writing and didn't want to support everyone else. Final thoughts. I wish there was some way that fanfic could be profitable. I'm really glad that there are some people that have been adapting their fanfic from one series into a completely independent series and then profiting that way. And I get that you're using someone else's IP, but I don't think authors and producers realize how much the fanfiction community works to keep fans interested in the IP even when no new official content is coming out. In an era where independent content creators are a huge source of entertainment, it would be nice if fanfic creators could get some sort of unofficial go-ahead to profit from fanfiction, even if there is profit sharing with the initial creators of the series. It frustrates me that a lot of Hollywood productions are basically fanfiction, like reenacting Shakespeare over and over again, and yet Hollywood tends to grossly underestimate the power or value of it. And my final thought is that fanfiction is a way of learning to write, or at least learning that you're able to write, that does not necessitate academia. And that makes it a very powerful resource of people that are marginalized. And I think that may be part of the reason that it's not taken as seriously, and it's deliberately not taken as seriously. Anyway, that is all that I had to say about this topic. If you like this video, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out as a small channel, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye!